In today's video, I want to talk about the difference between setting your AVR to small or large for your speakers. Now, each AVR is going to be a little bit different. This AVR that I'm showing today is the menu from the Denon AVR 4800H. This will also pretty much be similar to a lot of the Marantz receivers as well. If you have probably a year or two older Denon or Marantz, your menu may be a little bit different as far as graphically, but for the most part, these settings will be about the same. They've just made some updates to that. And part of this comes from a question that I received from Carlos. He says, "Hey Michael, I have this same AVR. Can you talk a little bit about the settings, particularly the audio? It does not show up small or large on the speakers in the manual setting." So like I said a few moments ago, Denon and Marantz have made some changes and updates to their user interface. So let's go ahead and walk through this. So I'm in the setup menu. If I come down to speakers and hit OK, we're going to come down to manual setup and hit OK. So in my previous video, I had the speaker layout set to just 2 speakers, no subwoofer. So if I go into here, we can see that I have a front pair of speakers selected yes, but I don't have a center, I did not have a surround, we don't have height speakers, and there's no subwoofer. So because this is set to no, that is going to set my main speakers to large or full range. So if I click back, and if I come down to crossovers and hit OK, you can see the speakers and crossover is set to full range. What this means is any signal sent to the receiver, let's say I'm watching Apple 4K or maybe a 4K disc or Kaleidescape, that signal that is coming in, all the audio is coming into the receiver, and then the receiver is sending all of that information, the low frequencies, the mid-range, and the high frequencies, full range directly to those 2 towers. Even if I had bookshelf speakers, it's still going to send a full range signal to those speakers because I've told the AVR I do not have a subwoofer, and therefore it doesn't have the ability to send those low frequencies to the sub. So the first thing I need to do to change my speakers from full range, your AVR may say large, is to set a crossover. But in order to do that, in this instance, I need to make sure that the subwoofer is turned on in the AVR. So we're going to go back. We're going to go back up to speaker layout, click OK. And then let's just go ahead and set this up like it was a standard. Let's just say we have a 7.1.4. So what that is 7 bed layer speakers, 1 subwoofer, and 4 height channels. So we'll come down here, we'll tell it that we do have a center channel. We'll come down here to surround. We'll come down here to, actually we are going to do surround backs. We'll do 2 speakers. So here in the diagram over to the right, I really like what Marantz and Denon have done. It just makes it very visually representative of what a typical home theater would look like. So you got 2 front speakers, a center channel, 2 side surrounds, and 2 back surrounds. That's that 7 bed layer speakers. We're also going to have a subwoofer, so let's go ahead and turn that on. So that makes it a 7.1 system. And then we're going to come back up here and add our height speakers. And let's just say we have 4 in-ceiling speakers. So we're going to change this from front height to top front. Actually, let me back up. I want to change that to 4 speakers. So now we're going to have a top front, and then I also want to have top. Let's click OK, and let's change that to top rears. So now you can see in the diagram we've got 7 bed layer speakers. We've got a 0.1, which is the single subwoofer, and then we have 0.4 on the height speakers, which are in ceiling. So this will be what we call a 7.1.4 setup. So now that we have each one of these speakers enabled, we're going to go back and take a look at our crossovers. So if we scroll down here and click crossovers, now we can see we have the ability to either set each one of those speakers to full range. Again, your AVR may say large. Large just simply means it's sending all of the frequency range from the highest frequency down to the lowest frequency to that speaker. So this is my personal recommendation. I do not run my speakers as large unless I'm only running in a 2.0 system. 2 speakers, no subwoofer. Anything other than that, as long as I have a subwoofer, my personal preference is to always offload the lowest frequencies to the subwoofer. By doing so, it will take a lot of the load off of your AVR, and it also will allow your speakers to play cleaner because they're not having to reproduce frequencies that are super low, like your LFE or your low frequency effects when you're watching a movie. So here's where I could click OK, and I could change this from full range to a frequency. So the way this works is you're telling the AVR, whatever frequency I set here, let's just say I set it to 80 Hertz. That is a pretty common frequency for a crossover. So what I'm telling the receiver, by setting it to 80 Hertz, anything 80 Hertz and below is going to get sent to the subwoofer. Now keep in mind, this is not a brick wall. It's not that 79 Hertz doesn't go to these speakers. It absolutely does, but there is a, let's just say, a roll off. There's a curve that will gradually roll that information off to the subwoofer so that it's just not a hard stop at 80 Hertz. Now let's say I have big tower speakers and maybe they're rated down to 30 Hertz. You might find by taking some measurements in your room that those speakers run optimally at 60 Hertz. They're handing off some of the higher frequencies, maybe the 60 Hertz, 70 Hertz, 80 Hertz, that you want to still be handled by those tower speakers, and anything lower than 60 Hertz, that gets passed off to your subwoofer. That's totally acceptable. The same is true for the rest of the speakers. Most subwoofers are powered, so they have a dedicated amplifier just to handle those low frequencies. So I'm of the opinion, let them do what they're best at. Even the biggest, baddest towers typically are not going to be able to reproduce frequencies below 20 Hertz, and that's a lot of content that you'll find in movies. So again, this is my personal preference, my opinion. I do not run my fronts as large. I don't run my center as large or full range in a setup like this. As long as you've got a subwoofer, set a crossover for each speaker and let the subwoofer handle those low frequencies. Now I'm going to go ahead and put this back up to 80 Hertz and click OK. I want to go ahead and show you one other thing when we're talking about crossovers, because this was so confusing to me for so many years, and hopefully this will help clear it up for you if you're confused as well. Let's go ahead and back up and let's go down to Advanced. Here you can see we've got a setting for low frequency effects or your LFE channel. Let's click OK. From here we want to come down to low pass filter. So this is the crossover frequency for your LFE channel. So let's say all of your speakers are set to 80 Hertz crossover. Your first inclination might be to set your LFE crossover also to 80 Hertz. The problem with this is if you set it to 80 Hertz, you're going to be missing out on content from 80 Hertz to 120 Hertz. So keep in mind, the LFE channel is a dedicated separate channel just containing low frequency effects. So think of things like gunshots, explosions, thunder, car crashes, things like that. These are low frequency effects that are in this channel. So my recommendation is to leave this set at 120 Hertz. You don't want to turn this down to 80 Hertz because now you're going to be missing out on the content from 80 Hertz and above that the director or the sound engineer intentionally placed in that LFE channel. So leave this set to 120 for your low pass filter or your LFE crossover, depending on your receiver, how they're going to list that out. But leave this at 120, and then you can set your mains and center, surrounds, height channels, all of those can be set to a different frequency depending on your room and depending on what measures the best. Now, of course, if you run something like Odyssey or Direct Live, it's going to set your crossovers on what it measures the room and how it feels are going to, work out best in your setup. So it may set your fronts to say 60 Hertz, It might set your center channel to 80 hertz. It might set your surrounds to 100 hertz. So you might have something that looks something similar to this, or maybe even 120 hertz. I've seen that happen on height channels. So something like this would not be very uncommon. Now there are some of you that like to run what we call double bass or mains plus LFE. Now again, this is a total preference. I recommend just try it, see which way sounds best to you, but my preference is not to run double bass or mains plus LFE. But I'll just go ahead and show you where you can make that change. If we go back, then we can come down to advanced, go to the LFE or the low frequency effects, and under subwoofer output, here's where you would change it from LFE to, in this case, it's called LFE plus main. Now again, if you have a different AVR besides a Denon or Marantz, it might be a setting that's called double bass. So here you can see a little diagram over to the right of what is physically taking place when you select LFE plus main versus just the LFE. But again, my preference, I just leave this set to LFE. So I hope this video has helped clarify the difference between setting your AVR crossover to small or large, full range, when you should do that and when you shouldn't. And again, these are just my personal preferences, but I'd love to hear what your preferences are for your system. Let me know down in the comments below. If you got any other questions, feel free to ask. Be sure to check out this other playlist of home theater basics here over to the left. As always, hope you guys have an incredible week. God bless, and we will catch you in the next video.